TFA fam, welcome in. We are on to week 9, and thankfully, we didn't have a lot of injuries this week. We had one major one. I mean, I guess at least at the position. Kirk Cousins suffering a torn, likely going to be a torn Achilles, done for the year. Sad to see that,
Oh,
but other than that, we've kind of avoided any major injuries this week. So some of the positions aren't going to be glaring. I don't think there's a ton of like just you have to go all in or anything like that on waiver ads this week, but I think there's some definitely useful ones, especially next week whenever we're going to be 4 teams back on bye. Uh, Broncos, Lions, Jags, and 49ers are all on bye. So quite a bit of fantasy, stars in there that we're gonna be worried about. So let's go ahead and get into it, and let's start with the quarterback position. These are some waivers streams. I was gonna put Kyler Murray, but he's kind of up there now. He's up to like 65% rostered at this point. If he's sitting out there in your league, I'm definitely gonna add him. Now they did mention today that Joshua Dobbs, I guess, is still going to start next week. We'll see if that happens. But if so, I always expected he probably would return week 10. But either way, starting things off, it is Derek Carr, who has three straight 300-yard passing games. And as today, he completed 19 of 27 for 310 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Colts. He also has back-to-back 20 fantasy point performances. The Saints take on a Bears defense that has allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the position. So Derek Carr is my clear waiver ad, the guy that I really want to target the most. And then next up, Sam Howell. Now, this isn't the best matchup, but Howell continues to be a productive fantasy quarterback. Today, he put up 397 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception for 32 fantasy points against the Eagles. The Patriots have allowed the 16th most fantasy points and the 8th, but they have allowed the 8th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. Now, that was before today. Obviously, those numbers are going to change today because Tua Tagovailoa really shredded that defense today, so they will go up a little bit from there. But Sam Howell is somebody I think you can look at. Now, Will Levis is not somebody that I thought we were going to be talking about today, but he had a day. He completed 19 of 29 for 238 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had his touchdown completions were 47, 16, 61, all to DeAndre Hopkins, and then another 33-yard touchdown pass to Nick Westbrook-Akine. He did so against a defense that has allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points. Not sure if we can believe this is sustainable, but if you're in dire need of a quarterback, Will Levis could be a good option against the Pittsburgh defense that has struggled at times against opposing quarterbacks. And then Baker Mayfield against Houston. Now, he had one of his best games of the season on Thursday night against the Bills. He completed 25 of 42 for 237 and 2 scores. He also chipped in 3 carries for 19 yards for 21 fantasy points. The Bucs travel to Houston to take on a Texans defense that has allowed the 10th most fantasy points. And then Mac Jones, I really don't love this, but if you're that desperate and there's really nobody else sitting out there, this is a great matchup. But this offense has been far from that. Jones completed 19 of 29 for 161 yards and 2 scores and 1 interception for 13 fantasy points against the Dolphins. Jones will be hard to trust against the Commanders, but they have allowed the 6th most passing yards, the 2nd most passing touchdowns, and the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Then lastly, I did put Bryce Young on here. Really, really feel gross about that, but they do get a matchup against the Colts. The Colts have been terrible against opposing quarterbacks this year and opposing wide receivers. Like, we really want to target the Colts, but Bryce Young is tough to trust in this matchup, but I don't hate it. So he is also on this list. So these are kind of the quarterbacks that I really wanted to hit on this week.
let's go ahead and move it on over to the running backs. Going to kick off the list with Amari DiMercato. After a couple of weeks ago where everyone got fooled, we thought he was going to be the guy and wasn't. He has since dominated opportunities for Arizona. In today's game, he had 21 opportunities, put up 79 yards. Isn't great by any means, but we obviously want to chase opportunity and volume in fantasy football. It seems like DiMercato is going to be on the receiving end of that. And especially if Kyler comes back, this could get really interesting. Obviously, we have James Conner kind of like waiting in the wings to come back from IR. But until then, DiMercato is going to be a guy you can pick up. Also want to mention Roschon Johnson. He was at 46% ownership on ESPN. So if he's available, he should be rostered. Obviously, we're expecting that in most competitive leagues or, leagues with 10 teams or more, he's likely rostered, but just wanted to throw him out there. Same thing with Jerick McKinnon, someone else who's likely rostered in competitive leagues, but if he's out there, he's still worth a stash. We saw the run that he went on last year. Going to be hard to trust because he's obviously the preferred pass catching back. We saw him have a season high in snap opportunities today, but again, that was with them trailing to Denver of all teams. So if he's out there, I still want to stash him. Tyjae Spears, again, especially with the trade deadline coming up, we got the report that Derrick Henry was told that he was not going to be traded. But I can't imagine that, like, if a team actually comes with like even a semi like strong offer, that they would turn it down. I mean, you're talking about someone who is getting up there in age, has a lot of miles on those tires, and the Titans aren't going anywhere. And I think he's a free agent after this season as well. So I can't imagine that Tennessee is going to be, signing him to any type of contract after this season. So take that for what it's worth. Tyjae Spears should still be rostered. Justice Hill, we're kind of seeing him prove his worth as a pass catching back. If Baltimore is going to be playing from a header with a lead, you're not going to necessarily be able to trust him. But if they're forced into a shootout or some type of catch up mode, Justice Hill is going to be the back you want to play. And then Devin Singletary, we're still looking at a split between him and Damian Pierce. Damian Pierce is getting the goal line touches, which is not great. And for some reason, Mike Boone is is involved. He had ran 8 routes. So if some of those routes start going toward Devin Singletary, or even if those get split between Singletary and Damian Pierce, he's still going to be someone you could look to pick up. Both of these running backs, talking about Singletary and Pierce here, saw at least 10 carries. Singletary was the only one to receive a target, though. So, Singletary is going to be more or less of like a desperation, low ceiling flex type option, deeper leagues. But, we know how quickly that this running back landscape can turn ugly. So he still should be picked up. And then moving on to some of the handcuff plus guys we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now. Zach Charbonnet needs to be rostered if he is still available. Kenny Gainwell, same thing. Latavius Murray is another desperation guy. If he doesn't score you a touchdown, he is going to ruin your week. But like I said with Singletary, beggars can't really be choosers here at the running back position. Straight up handcuffs, Tank Bigsby, Rico Dowdle, Eli Mitchell. And then the watch list this week is going to be Chase Edmonds. Came back in his first game and doubled up Keyshawn Vaughn in snaps immediately. I mean, it was 8-4, so it's not, not anything crazy. And Rachaad White did look a little bit better, specifically in the passing game. But we know that Rachaad White for the other weeks of this year has not looked good. So if Chase Edmonds can start creeping up in his involvement, he's someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move over to the wide receivers. And we talked about him last week. And we're going to talk about him again this week. And it's Jahan Dotson. We saw it last week where his target share kind of jumped up, and it really jumped up this week. He is rostered in just a smidge under 50% of leagues. If he was dropped to your league, this should change after a big day, his biggest day of the season, hauling in 8 of 10 targets for 108 yards and a score. Dotson obviously has the talent, but after a rocky start to the season, he has seen 18 targets over his last 2 games. He could be a wide receiver 4 moving forward if he can continue to see this decent of a target share. He kind of feels a little bit like a Brandon Ayuk, right? If you remember back whenever he was kind of in the doghouse, back when he was with the 49ers, no one really knew what was going on after all the hype that he drew over the offseason. And then he really, over the second half, he really balled out. This could be Jahan Dotson. So if he's sitting out there, he definitely shouldn't be any longer. And then Tank Dell, I want to put him back on here. He's still rostered in less than 60% of leagues. Obviously, not a great game today. And really, none of the Texans pass catchers had a good game today. He only saw 4 targets, turned that into 3 catches for 16 yards, but better days are ahead for Tank Dell, and he should be rostered in more leagues than this. Brandon Cooks hauled in 3 of 4 targets today for 49 yards and a score after being completely irrelevant through the first 5 games. Cooks has now put up double-digit fantasy points in back-to-back games. The only frustrating part is he hasn't seen more than 4 targets since week 3. However, more heavy passing game scripts are ahead. So Brandon Cooks, if he is sitting out there, I definitely think you should be looking at him in a 12-team league or higher. Quentin Johnston, welcome to the party. We've been waiting for a Quentin Johnston to break out all year, and we may or may not be seeing that tonight as he's already surpassed his best performance in the first half against the Bears. He has 4 catches for 32 yards in the first half against the Bears. The first-round pick could be one of the best ads if he can put it together this year. Josh Palmer's obviously been dealing with some injuries. He left this game, then came back. But Quentin Johnston, first-round pick, we know this is a guy that they want to get involved in. If they can finally unlock him, I mean, he could end up being one of the best waiver ads, over the second half of the season if he can do so. Obviously, with being tethered to Justin Herbert, so really like Quentin Johnston at least as a speculative ad, especially if he continues strong on this path tonight. He could end up being number 1 on this list. So next up, let's talk about Demario Douglas, which I talked about on the Sunday show. Somebody that I thought was going to be on here, and here he is. He actually led the team in targets with 7. However, he only turned that into 5 catches for 25 yards. But why the reason he's so high on this list wasn't because of the production, it was more so because Kendrick Bourne left the game with what is believed to be an MCL injury. We'll have to see on that. But if he's going to miss some time, Douglas metrics also point to a possible breakout coming as he's 23rd in yards per route run and 16th in target separation. It also doesn't hurt that the Commanders allow the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Douglas is a plug and play wide receiver 4 in PPR formats next week. So do like Demario Douglas is only rostered in 3% of leagues. Rashid Shaheed, I feel like we've talked about this before, but he is a very boom or bust. Which he showed that in his numbers today. He hauled in all 3 of his targets for 153 yards and a score. He's going to be hard to trust, but in certain matchups, Shaheed could be a useful flex option. Jaden Reed, I really don't know what the guy needs to do to continue. I mean, I know he hasn't been putting up monster numbers, but in a world where we need depth, especially with so many bye weeks coming in that's still to come. Jaden Reed once again put up another double-digit fantasy points performance today. Not sure what else he really needs to do, but he continues to score double-digit fantasy points, and no one seems to care. He hauled in 4 of 6 for 83 yards. He may not have a massive upside at this point, being in this Packers offense, but he's been a reliable PPR option, and they seem to really look for him inside the red zone as well. He's seen multiple red zone targets, and he saw another one today. So which he drew a pass interference call on. He caught it, but he ended up going out of bounds. But Jaden Reed definitely should be rostered way more than 17% of leagues, especially PPR formats. Khalil Shakur, 1%. Now, we kind of felt like we did this song against him last year, but not sure if this is a sign of things to come or if he's going to be a more useful fantasy option. But he flashed last year, and he did so again on Thursday night, hauling in all 6 of his targets for 92 yards. He's now seen 10 targets in his last 2 games. I think he's worthy of a stash just because he's attached to Josh Allen. And then Jonathan Mingo, the uber athletic Mingo, had the best day of the season, hauling in 4 of 5 for 62 yards today for 10 fantasy points. I don't love this offense, but Mingo has a ton of raw talent. And if Bryce Young can have a second half turnaround, Mingo could carve himself out a pretty solid role. It also helps as they take on the Colts and the Bears over the next 2 games, which are 2 very good fantasy matchups. Lastly, we still have Michael Wilson, Rashad Bateman, Jamison Crowder, Darnell Mooney. All of these guys. Now, Jamison Crowder is on here because he had a really big day. I'm not going to put him any higher. They still have a lot of other pass catchers here in this Commanders offense. And Curtis Samuel did leave during this game did not play with a toe injury today. But Jamison Crowder, if Curtis Samuel was forced to miss some time, Jamison Crowder would probably slot in as that slot wide receiver and could see some more targets here. So he's more of a plug and play option. Rashad Bateman, I will say this: he has started to really put together. It's not showing up necessarily in the fantasy production, but you're starting to see him look a little bit better, earning a little bit more trust with Lamar Jackson. And if he can do so, I think Rashad Bateman could end up being a guy over the second half who sees a little bit bigger of a role. Obviously, he's never really been able to put it together, but I think the talent is still there. And then lastly, some like 14 teams and higher: Jalen Hyatt, Jake Bobo, Tyler Scott, Alec Pierce, Darius Davis. Like all these guys are kind of very late round guys. If you have to be in a super deep league to even think about. So these are the kind of the wide receivers that I'm most looking at this week.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Curtis Samuel did play today, and he left. So he had the foot injury, and then he ended up leaving with a toe injury. So I don't know if it's the same injury, but he did play. I think he had 4 targets, and then ended up leaving. So still waiting to hear whether or not that is going to be a long-term absence. But Jamison Crowder just making another resurgence. Who would have thought? Let's go ahead and wrap it up with the tight end streams. Do just want to say right off the top that if Dalton Kincaid is available, he should be rostered as well, but he was above the 50% threshold that we look for here on the Sunday waiver show. So we're going to lead off with Trey McBride, who had an almost 38% target share, put up 95 yards and a score on 14 targets in this one. With Ertz on IR, he's the clear grab this week, and you can just keep him in your lineups going forward. Mike Wilson has been up and down. And outside of Hollywood Brown, they really don't have a lot going on in terms of pass catchers. So, and like I said, with Kyler Murray potentially returning, this could get even better. Logan Thomas, always in this streaming discussion, just like the most perfect Logan Thomas line, 6 for 44 and a score in today's game. So he's always going to be in the streaming discussion. Michael Mayer, he disappointed last week, but he's still the clear guy here as far as tight ends go for the Raiders. So if he's out there, he's another option. I threw Donald Parham on here with that little asterisk just with if I'm only really looking at him if Gerald Everett is going to be out again. He's obviously having himself a nice little day here on Sunday Night Football, but that is he's getting more looks in this one because of Gerald Everett being out. So those will be the tight end streams for week 9.
Yeah. Let's jump over here and answer some of these questions so we can wrap this up. Marcus, time to panic on Pollard. There are certainly things that are frustrating with him. The fact that they're not really utilizing him much in the passing game is super frustrating. I don't really understand why they're not trying to utilize him more in that department. He is still seeing the bulk of the touches, and they just continue to get these game scripts where they just blow these teams out, and they're just not really needing to run the ball a lot. But overall, it's really just really concerned me with how few of options he has seen in terms of the passing game. Like he feels like he should be a guy that should be seeing 5 or 6 targets a game, and it's just not happening. So, um, at this point, there's nothing you can do with them. Like you can't trade them because I don't think you're going to get value to be able to constitute that. But I do think that he is certainly it is certainly worrisome the fact that he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1, and they just continue to play in these game scripts where he kind of gets game scripted out a little bit. Because they kind of blew the doors off the Rams made a little run at the end of the first half, but then after that, they just kind of blew the doors off of them. And it looks like it felt like they really weren't trying to run the ball that much. Like they really were trying to force the ball through the air. So I do think some better days are coming, and maybe even Tony Pollard is a good buy low if people really are getting worried about it and really want to get out from this because the usage is still there. Eventually, it's going to turn itself around at some point. Well, it ended up playing
Yeah,
Pitts over McBride. That's brutal.
that is brutal. I was going to say with Pollard, obviously the passing game usage is frustrating, but just looking at the box score today, you see 26 carries for Dallas, but Rico Dowdle was the only other running back to have a carry. 3 of those were also Cooper Rush and kneel downs as well. So Pollard is still getting 12 carries to Rico Dowdle's 5. He's still, like you said, the usage is still there. And like you would think that regression is going to swing positively in Pollard's way at some point.
Alex Spears still a stash. Yeah, he definitely is still worth a stash. Like, there's a lot of other
Yep.
things that could happen. Even if Derrick Henry does it, he's continually still seeing touches. He's continually seeing snaps. So that's about as much as you could ask for, anyways. And if something were to happen, or if they did decide to shut Derrick Henry down, if he suffers some sort of injury, they shut him down. He's definitely somebody that I want on my bench. Dropping Kendrick Bourne, I think you can. Maybe let's wait and see tomorrow and see what happens and see what the news is about this injury. But if it sounds as bad as what it could be, then he's probably going to be out for multiple weeks, and he's not a name that you just have to roster on your team anyways. So,
Yeah.
True Taylor, I got a trade offer
Speaking
Swift for Pollard. I like having Swift, but I don't know who you guys like better for the rest of the season. I would rather have Pollard.
I would rather have Pollard as well.
And then, is there anything else? Drop Roshan or Warren for Akers.
It was super frustrating what we saw with Akers today. Let me just pull this up real quick so I don't misquote any.
And I'll also
here.
say this that it is now a major downgrade to the Vikings offense as a whole. Kirk Cousins is now gone. Yes, they won and they're in the playoff contention, so they could, I guess, go out and make a trade for somebody or add somebody else. But they're not going to be able to replace Kirk Cousins. And I know a lot of people hate Kirk Cousins and think that he's terrible and all this other stuff, but Kirk Cousins has been a pretty solid quarterback. You can easily say he's a top 15 NFL quarterback, and losing him is going to be a problem. And I just don't know how you replace that. And so it's a downgrade to the entire passing room. It's going to be a downgrade to the offense for sure.
So obviously at the end of their last game against the 49ers, it looked like Akers was starting to take over. Akers came in and had some of the early work as well. And then it just ended up being Alexander Madison in the second half. Madison ended up with 44 snaps to 17 for Akers. Madison also ran 22 routes to 4 for Akers. So, like you said, the biggest thing here is Kirk Cousins being out. Like, could they, potentially lean more on the running game because Kirk Cousins isn't there? Sure, but I don't think anyone's going to be too afraid of not stacking the box against Jaron Hall or whoever it ended up might being. Truthfully, what quarterbacks are out there that you would be like, oh, okay, like I don't know, Tannehill, I guess, like if the Titans move on from him, but like I don't know. So I at this point I would not. I would keep both Warren and Roshan.
Yeah, I think I agree. Mostert or Monty rest of season, half point PPR. I think Gibbs may cut into Monty such as moving forward. It's still Monty for me. When he comes back, I don't like. Yes, like Gibbs is going to see more opportunities, but I don't think it's going to be much. I mean, Dan Campbell has said that that Monty's the guy, and so like I don't think anything's going to change from there. I think after the bye, I think he goes back to being the same guy. I think he continues to get utilized the same way. So where Mostert like it was. I mean, they were using 3 running backs today, which is frustrating. And then you also have to factor in that Devon Achane is coming back too from that situation. So for me, it's
Yep.
definitely Monty.
Yeah, I agree. I want Monty rest of the season.
Yeah. So, anyways, that being said, that's the last of the questions. Hope everybody has a good week, rest of the week. Hope everybody picked up some dubs today. If not, leave whatever. If you have any questions in the comment section below, we'll be sure to answer all of them for you. Obviously, Halloween is Tuesday night. Hope everybody has a good Halloween. Stay a little safe. Hopefully, the kids get a lot of candy. And I hope all is well. We'll be back in this week to get back to all the rankings and everything else, normal content. So, hope everybody has a good week. Let's win. I don't know what I was going to say there.
Let's win. Let's
Yeah,
just win.
yeah,
Whatever it is, let's win.
win.
Let's win at life.
Yeah, you're winning. You're winning at life. So, anyways, all right. Have a good rest of the night. We'll see you. We'll see you here shortly. Bye bye.